Welcome to the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm your host, Robin L. Owens, PhD, and this is where we dive in each week to give advice, tools, and tips for high-achieving women who have written books that make a difference for people while at work. I am a professor, and when I'm not doing that, I am speaking, writing, coaching, and teaching high-achieving women who have written books how to make a bigger difference, have more impact, and more purpose with their books. Okay, let's dive in. Before we get started with the episode, I want to ask you a question. Is your book ready to be turned into a successful online course? That's a question so many people have asked me. And so I decided to create a free resource to answer that very question. I took the time-tested process that I use for turning books into successful online courses, and I created a checklist that you can review and check off so you know the ways in which your book can be turned into a successful online course. So just head on over to createmasterfulcourses.com, createmasterfulcourses.com, and get your free checklist there. All right, now let's get to the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. So glad you're here and listening to the podcast. Really appreciate you. I say it all the time, and I will continue to say it because I can't say it enough. Really appreciate you. Where would we be without you? And because of you, you helped us get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes, the podcast search engine. So thank you for doing that. And if you would love it, if you would review the podcast, rate, subscribe, it'll help us keep it going in this way. So thank you for that. And today I'm talking with Jessica Cording. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Jessica. She's a registered dietitian, health coach, and author with a passion for helping people simplify their wellness routine by building sustainable, healthy habits. I mean, who doesn't need that? Anyway, through her writing, consulting, public speaking, and counseling, she works with individuals, corporations, and the media to make healthy living approachable and enjoyable. Also, she's the author of The Little Book of Game Changers, 50 Healthy Habits for Managing Stress and Anxiety, and the book, The Farewell Tour, A Caregiver's Guide to Stress Management, Sane Nutrition, and Better Sleep. And if that was not enough, she's the host of her own podcast, Drama Free Healthy Living, and she is a believer in the mental and physical benefits of exercise. So she's also a certified Pilates instructor. And you can find her work in numerous print and digital publications, and she's a regularly featured nutrition expert. And I'm so glad she's here with us today. Welcome, Jessica Cording.
Oh, it's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you're here and taking time out of your busy schedule and life to be here and share with us. All right, so let's jump right in. You heard me read the bio that you have for us, but tell people in your own words, two things about anything you want to share about who you are, and then anything you want to share about the work you do.
Yeah, I mean, something I've found, and maybe you've experienced this too, Robin, as you've gotten to know people in our world. Just a lot of people in the health and wellness industry came here because they at one time needed support and guidance. And that's very much my story. I've been very candid in my work about the fact that I, found my way to nutrition because of watching relatives struggle with chronic health issues, had family members with terrible relationships with food, myself experienced an eating disorder at a very young age. And then, I got really interested in the mental health piece of the nutrition, like the food mood connection, and how exercise and other lifestyle factors impact our well-being because of my own experience navigating PTSD recovery and, I learning a lot of things the hard way. So I'm always trying to help simplify and provide evidence-based insight and tips. I'm all about the actionable tips and making what can be overwhelming feel doable.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important, especially now we're all doing so many things. So the simpler it is to do it, that's very helpful. Yeah. All right. So did you want to say any more? I didn't want to cut you off. Did I cut you
Yeah,
off?
no, let's
Okay.
keep going.
Okay. All right. Great. All right. So you mentioned this somewhat, but tell us the main premise of the book. And we're talking about the little book of Game Changers, 50 Healthy Habits for Managing Stress and Anxiety. What's the main premise of the book?
So this is really a compilation of some of the mind, body, and spirit techniques that have been most effective for my patients and clients over the years. As a dietitian and a health coach and a Pilates instructor, I speak with my clients about, yes, nutrition, lots of nutrition, but we also get into things like building habits around exercise. I Almost everybody I work with, we end up talking a lot about sleep hygiene and stress management. Stress is so pervasive and it has a really big impact. And so when the first iteration of this book was 100 healthy, I forget what the original working title was, but it was 100 little life hacks basically. And then we got a book offer and I was like, this is not the right thing. It wasn't the right fit. And I said to my agent, I was like, all right, I know this is crazy, but I need to walk away from this, got to retool. And I was at the time I was taking care of my father while he was undergoing treatment for pancreatic cancer. And I knew for myself that the stress and the anxiety of that were having an impact. I was taking all my own advice. And I was also, so I thought about some of my clients and what was working for them. And I noticed that the stress, the anxiety piece was really what a lot of people were struggling with. That, yeah, I mean, generally speaking, it's one thing to stay on track with healthy habits when life is calm and things are under control. But then when life gets real, a lot of those habits go by the wayside for a lot of folks. So I really wanted to create a resource that would help people stay consistent with habits that supported their goals, even when they were going through stress or if anxiety was something that tended to, knock them off their game, to really provide some tips that like everyday realistic tips anybody could do to
Hmm.
help them stay on track and not feel like they're constantly getting thrown all about.
Is there one tip that most people are surprised by how helpful it was? I mean, or that you hear most, you get the most comments about? Which one would that be?
Oh, I mean, I think the one I get the most comments about is the loneliness game plan. So this is in the spirit section of the book. And the loneliness game plan actually was something I created for myself when I was in college. I just remember just feeling really like just I would get very down and very lonely. And we know that loneliness is a huge public health issue. And it's been like 15 plus years since I was in college, closer to 20. So, but I still, and so it's still relevant. It's more so probably even now, but the loneliness game plan. And you could translate this to other mental health struggles that you may be having. But the loneliness game plan is really about making a list of things that you can do when you feel lonely, little activities or tasks or things that will help you get into a better headspace, pass the time, help you shift your mindset. So that's one that I have gotten so many comments about is the loneliness game plan. And I think the other one that people always comment on is putting your own name on your calendar because it's so easy to give away our time to other people, especially if someone else books time on our calendars, like with the electronic calendars that most of us have now. So that's been a huge one for a lot of people I've heard from about this book is putting your own name on your calendar.
Yes, yes, that both of those valuable resources, and especially putting your name on your calendar because then it gives you the opportunity to do those other things. Take time to work on the exercises that you mentioned. All right, so now you mentioned this earlier. You were caring for your father, and it kind of brought you to this work. Say more about the ways in which the book reflects who you are.
Yeah, well, it's funny because Little Book of Game Changers, in some ways, I feel like that was the safe book for me to write because it was very easy to not share. I mean, I did share a lot of my own personal story. And, I think something that is very, something that, I would say is part of my signature approach is that I always use personal story to illustrate and to really share that I also am a human having a human experience and that I know what it's like to have to figure things out I think there's this misconception that healthcare professionals have always known what the hell they're doing. And, a lot of us are needing to figure out different things at different times. So, in Little Book of Game Changers, I do share little bits and pieces of my story as just a human living and working and writing, mostly in New York City at that time. The farewell tour, which came out in 2022, I used a lot more personal story, and I really shared the behind the scenes of what I was going through as a caregiver for my father and how that affected my physical health. I talk about a near-death experience that I had. That was a big wake-up call. I talk about even how caregiving impacted my relationships. I talk very candidly about we'll call it a situationship I was in at the time. But also, in the farewell tour, I really got even deeper into some of the, at my core, I'm very much, a writer and a creative. And so in the farewell tour, I created a playlist based off of songs that my father and I were each listening to during the course of his illness and around when he passed away. And so I cobbled together all these different songs and I made a farewell tour playlist because my dad was in the music business. So I grew up around that world. It's probably why I'm not an entertainer, just being musically inclined. And so it was really, in that book, I took a lot more creative risks. I shared a lot more of my own personal story. It was also the first place that I had ever written publicly about my experience as a trauma survivor. So that was, a little bit more of a gutsy book, so to speak.
Yeah.
But in both of them, it's very much just about who I am, what I'm about, and really just about helping people calm down, feel more balanced, and really about tuning out the drama and tuning into what your mind and body need.
Yes. And what a beautiful way to honor your father with the playlist, something that was a passion related to a passion of his and yours of writing, and to combine that. That's a beautiful way to honor him. So good for you for doing that. All right. So now you talked about helping people kind of settle and calm. Is there any part of you that when you were young, like you were a little girl, little Jessica, was any of this kind of budding back then that you remember, or that you could see little inklings of it coming out?
Yeah, I always had a big imagination. So we'll say that. I was always a storyteller. Always, always, always. I started writing literally as soon as I learned how, like in the first grade. But I think another piece, I think I did develop an interest in health and wellness very, very young. I remember being as young as like 11, maybe even younger, but I grew up with grandparents who were going through cancer. And, there was so much information out there, even though it was like the 90s, so I just remember like reading anything I could get my hands on. And there was a point where it was not helpful. I developed a lot of food phobias that were, when I say I had an eating disorder at a young age, I think if it were today, it probably would have been classified as orthorexia, which wasn't really a common term back in the 90s. So I was lucky that I had the experience of working with a dietitian and a mental health practitioner at that age, who was really learning about the basics of nutrition. Saved me so much stress down the road. It was just really nice to go into adolescence and early adulthood, with my eyes open instead of just being swayed by all the messaging that especially women get about food and nutrition and exercise. So I was a tennis instructor as a teenager. I always joke about being a secret athlete. Very creative and always writing, but I enjoyed sports. And so it's been nice to be able to use all of my interests in my career.
Yeah. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. All right. So now let's think about your role as an author. You talked about writing from a very young age. So I'm imagining people who are listening who have written books. And so now, like you, they have different hats that they wear. So now let's talk about the author hat. What has been the most rewarding experience related to being an author?
Oh, wow. I love telling stories and connecting with people. And I think that's been the really most rewarding piece of it, just to be able to share that and to hear from others that it has improved their well-being and helped them feel less alone. And that's been very, very meaningful to me for sure.
That's great. Has there been anything that's been helpful in you getting your book into the hands and the hearts of other people?
Yeah, relationships. I have found that just nurturing relationships, getting to know people. I think sometimes what happens in the media world, I mean, in many fields, but there's sometimes these transactional relationships, and I just don't, I'm allergic to that. I don't know how to do that. But when I reflect on sort of things that have helped me move forward and connections that have led to other things, it always comes back to just getting out there, meeting people, hearing their story, getting to know them. And I find that when you just really prioritize just nurturing relationships, with the people that you click with, things just have a way of, opportunities just have a way of coming up organically. At least that's been my experience. So I know it's some people, there's it's easy to get impatient, but I think one thing that helps me when I start to get those little flickers of like, oh, I should be doing this by now, I should be doing that, is thinking about just really just, when you take the time to really let things unfold as they're meant to, you get such a rich experience, and you learn so much along the way from the people on that path.
Yeah, I found that to be true in my own case too. It really, all the most meaningful and powerful experiences have come from connecting with others. And in my case, through the podcast and other ways and being out and talking to people. So I resonate with what you're saying. All right. So now, the podcast is its leadership purpose, but what I say, it's for high achieving women. So my definition of high achieving women, this is how I define it, because high achieving is a general term. Probably lots of people mean lots of things by it, but this is what I mean by it. The woman who is ambitious, professional, responsible, both at work and at home. People come to her the people who are close to her come to her to ask questions at work and at home. Like, she's the person they come to, and she's the one that supports them. She's responsible. And on top of all of that, she's written at least one book. And she's good at a couple things. So people feel like, well, she doesn't need any support. So I started the podcast to say, who supports them while they're supporting everyone else? And so that was the intent of the podcast. And I see you nodding as if you resonate with that.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So with the person in mind, what's some piece of advice from your professional life or from your personal life just to support the woman I just described? What would you say?
I would think one of the most important things she probably needs to hear is that she's doing a lot better than she thinks she's doing. I think another important thing is that it's okay to put your own needs on your list of priorities. I think that's also huge.
Yeah. Yes, because that could be lost in the midst of doing for others.
Always. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So now this is the last question. The podcast again is leadership purpose. Do you think it's important for you or others to have a sense of purpose in your work? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Oh, I love that question. It's a juicy one. I mean, I don't know what it feels like not to have a purpose, so I feel like I can't quite answer that. Like, I feel like I came out of the womb, like with a path, like a thing, just an inner fire that I can't let it go out, and I think that what I would say to that is I think that, for people, I think it is important to have a purpose. I don't know if it's essential for everybody, but I think that for people who want to feel aligned and connected to what they're doing and who want to feel that they are tuned into something bigger than themselves and that they're making an impact, I think that having that inner guidance, that inner compass of what feels aligned to you and what drives you forward and helps you filter, what actions to take, what decisions to make, what to say yes to, what to say no to. I think that it is important to have purpose.
Yes. Yes. All right. So now, is there anything that comes to mind that I didn't get a chance to ask you? Like, oh, one more thing before we tell people where they can get in touch with you. Any thoughts pop up or anything you want to say? If not, it's okay.
Yeah, one thing that I often like to remind people of is that taking time for yourself and your own needs is not selfish. It's essential for survival. And when we take care of ourselves, And when I say take care of ourselves, it doesn't have to mean like an 11-step bedtime routine or like waking up at 5 a.m. It's just like, what are your 2 or 3 non-negotiables for feeling like a functional human? But when you take care of yourself, you are better able to show up for others. And then when you are spreading that positive energy, it trickles to, not just your life, but those around you, the community, globally. So taking care of yourself is a positive thing. And if it helps to look at it as a responsibility, some people have an easier time with that. But self-care is not selfish. It's essential.
Yeah, so powerful. All right. So where can people be in touch with you? I'm imagining people saying, hey, I have some stress. I need to manage better. Where can they be in touch with you?
Yeah. So my website is jessicacordingnutrition.com. You can tune into my podcast on my website or visit Drama Free Healthy Living podcast on Apple, Spotify, all the places. I'm present on all the social media platforms, but I'm most active on Instagram. I'm just at Jess Cording. But you can also find me on Facebook at Jessica Cording Nutrition.
That's great. We'll be sure to put those in the show notes so everybody could have it. Jessica, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day and schedule. I know it's been back to back already for you. So thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. Really appreciate you.
Oh, it's so nice to be here with you, Robin. Thank you for having me.
It's my delight. Okay, everyone. And I would love to hear from you. I'm on all the social media at Robin L. Owens, PhD, at Robin L. Owens, PhD. But I'm most active on LinkedIn, and I'd love to hear your response to the podcast, to this episode in particular. How do you take care of yourself? What was helpful? Or anything you want to say about this episode or the podcast. So join me over at LinkedIn. Send me a message at Robin L. Owens, PhD. And if you happen to be an author who's written a book and you've been thinking about expanding your message beyond the book, and thinking about creating a course, but not quite sure it's your book lineup. Would it be right for a course? I have a free resource that will answer that question for you. Just head on over to my website, createmasterfulcourses.com, createmasterfulcourses.com, and grab your free resource there. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. If you enjoyed it, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop every week, and I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Meanwhile, this is Dr. Robin signing off. See you next time.